Kaboom, kapow, welcome, welcome, welcome back to Live with Littlewood, the new look Live with Littlewood. Now, in our studio here, we have a live studio audience. We've got a lot to get through on tonight's show. We've got a lot of catching up to do. I'm going to be joined by GB News' Tom Harwood, Christian Calgie, senior reporter at Guido Fawkes, and from the IEA home team, Christopher Snowdon, our head of lifestyle economics, and Emma Revell, our head of public affairs. We've got a huge range of topics to get through. Taxes going up. Keir Starmer's speech to the Labour Party conference, his first live appearance at Labour Party conference in the flesh. Fuel shortages. What's going on? Why isn't the market operating? And we'll also be going through the latest plans to apparently cut down on our waistlines, the strategy put forward by the Obesity Health Alliance earlier this week. All that coming up on tonight's show. Well, welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining me, Mark Littlewood, Director General of the IEA, for this swanky new look Live with Littlewood here in our swanky studio. We've even invested in a sofa. We've even got a live studio audience with us. So normality is really returning. We can now actually speak to each other face to face. A lot to catch up on. Live with Littlewood has been off air for 77 days. That's 110,870 minutes. Quite a lot's happened in that period of time. And I've got a great lineup of guests to help us take a free market look on the recent events, not just this week, but going back a bit too. Later on, I'm going to be joined by my colleague, Christopher Snowdon, to ask about the fuel problems. I'm going to be joined by Christian Calgie of the Guido Fawkes website, get his take on Keir Starmer's speech to the Labour Party conference today. And also from the home team, our head of public affairs, Emma Revell. We're also going to be touching on the Obesity Health Alliance's new proposals and what we make of them in terms of trimming our waistlines. But first up, delighted to welcome back to the show and on to this new show, GB News' Tom Harwood, pundit, commentator, all-round good guy. Tom, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
So, Tom, thanks for joining us. You've got to help me because, as I say, I haven't done any work for 77 days. So I'm not really across the news at the moment, whereas you are on air morning, noon and night on GB News. What have we missed? Like our taxes are now the highest they've ever been for 70 years or so.
Yeah, well, depending on which way you look at it, there's some estimates that it's 50 years, some that it's 70. Some peculiar people are saying that it's only since the early 1980s that they're, but it really depends how you count it. What's been occupying my time for the last 5 days is the Labour Party conference down in Brighton, which has been a very peculiar affair of factional infighting at the same time as producing really trivial news. For what you'd assume to be something that would be relatively seismic, Britain's second largest party really meeting, changing its constitution, everything else. Actually, what's the big takeaway? Very little. Keir Starmer potentially cementing his place in charge of that party, upsetting some of the sort of trotty left of that party. But really, have they budged in the polls? Have they budged in the polls for the last 3 months? No.
So all of the reporting you're doing is having no impact whatsoever on the great British public, basically, right?
I like to think that we help to inform, but not to command.
Let me start with the Tories there, because over the national insurance rise to pay for the NHS and social care, so it's all going to end up just going to the NHS, right? I mean, it's not going to go to social care, is it?
Well, this is the thing. It's for the first 3 years overwhelmingly going to go to the NHS. It will be a very brave government that then decides to reduce the NHS budget.
No, Tom, what's going to happen is the NHS are going to say in 3 years' time, it's fine, we don't need any more money, the NHS is not in crisis, please divert the cash elsewhere. I mean, surely you're confident of that, no?
Oh,
no.
Do you know what? It's very interesting. I interviewed Steve Reed, the Shadow Cabinet member, when was it? A couple of weeks ago, and asked him, surely this money is going to go from the NHS to social care once that backlog's clear. You know what he said? I hope so.
Right.
So, which was remarkable. A Labour frontbencher saying he hopes the NHS gets less money in 3 years' time. I wonder if that will still be the Labour Party position when the time comes. I doubt it will be very many people's position, and so really what we're going to have to see potentially is this social care levy going up and up and up if there's actually going to be a fix to social care. And do you know what I think is going to be overwhelmingly depressing? Is that when the government announced the NHS and social care levy is going to be raised, there's probably going to be large support for it.
Mm-hmm. And I was going to ask you about this. Look, obviously, if we were to look ahead to next week, that's when the Conservatives are gathering for their annual jamboree in Manchester. But were you surprised, as the GB News' Westminster watcher, how limited the rebellion was on the Tory benches against this? I mean, what do I know? All of my political predictions go wrong, but I can remember talking about the policy on the day it was unveiled, and I was speculating it might not actually get passed because perhaps 40 or so Conservatives will vote against it. How many voted against it? Fewer than 6, wasn't it?
There were 5 on the first reading of it, and then I think there were 6 at the end of the process. But it is remarkable that you had a lot of bravado and a lot of people saying this is terrible behind closed doors. When it comes to actually putting their head above the parapet, this is not as rebellious a Tory party as potentially the reports suggested over the last year and a half. And when the legislation was sort of rushed through as well, that's when everyone was saying, committee stage is when all these Tories are going to suddenly show their skin. Absolutely, it didn't happen. It just didn't happen. And there was a very concerted whipping effort. Whips were telling junior MPs to treat this as a confidence vote in their government, which is quite remarkable given that this was a manifesto-breaching commitment.
Yeah, no, sure. OK, well, this is bloody great. We've been going for about 7 minutes and you're thoroughly depressed me already about the state of the world and everything I've missed. Look, one thing that can we be optimistic about, that to all intents and purposes, I was going to say the pandemic's over, but the lockdowns are over now. Are we now permanently back to normal? Can I breathe out and be confident we're not going to go into lockdown again at Halloween or Christmas or whatever else? Do you think that is done and dusted? I know people are still getting ill from the virus, but that aside, we don't seem to be closing down large parts of the economy and won't ever again, will we?
I think in England we can be pretty confident about this. The government really doesn't want to. It unveiled its toolbox a few weeks ago, and its toolbox is remarkably light. It doesn't include lockdown measures. It includes maybe mandating some masks and maybe introducing vaccine passports. I mean, in terms of the measures that could be brought forward, that's not shutting down any business. That's not. I mean, it's really, really light touch. I think that people are relatively confident, given the way that the cases are bouncing around at the moment, despite we've had some bad weather, schools have gone back. Cases haven't gone into an exponential rise. We're seeing them bumbling back and forth, and that probably suggests that we're in an all right place. I say England, though, because something interesting happened last week in Wales.
I find that hard to believe, but I'll bear with you, right?
You're gonna upset a lot of people watching, and I am actually a quarter Welsh.
OK, well, I've upset you already.
Depending when the rugby's on, I may be more or less upset. But the Welsh Labour Party cancelled their Welsh conference due to fears about coronavirus. Now, their conference wasn't due to take place until late November. If Mark Drakeford is saying that his own party conference may not be able to go ahead because of coronavirus, what does that suggest about what the Welsh government might do for lots of other parts of the economy? That's the worry.
And what? So you think that could be, we could see in the devolved area? What's going on in Scotland as well?
Well,
I'll say something rude about the Scots as well in a moment, but I mean, they're still under a stricter regime, right?
A slightly stricter regime. Nightclubs are open. I went to a Scottish nightclub 3 weeks ago.
As did Michael Gove, I noticed.
I must stress it wasn't the same one. I was in Glasgow.
That's reassuring.
And he was up in Aberdeen, I think. But there's a rule in Scotland, because Nicola Sturgeon first said that we're going to keep masks, wanting to differentiate from the English regime. And then she said that we're opening up the nightclubs. And I don't know about you, but sort of a masked nightclub seems an almost ridiculous affair. Gosh, I mean, I'll leave you to imagine. But there's now a rule in terms of where you can and can't wear masks in Scotland, and it's if you're dining, drinking, or dancing, the 3 Ds. So you're exempt from wearing a mask if you're dining, drinking or dancing, which means that, I guess, if you wanted to take a train journey somewhere, where of course masks are mandated, as long as you sort of have a little boogie on the way, you'll be able to take off your mask and that's all fine.
But I'm not even sure the rules are that clear up there, right? I was speaking to somebody who'd been to a wedding in Scotland, and you had to wear the masks. But I thought the entire point of a wedding was you were either dining, drinking or dancing or probably doing all three simultaneously. So I would have thought that was an exemption, but apparently not.
Well, I went and spoke at the Glasgow University Union a couple of weeks ago, and they got around the rules. I shouldn't be dumping them in it, but,
go on.
But everyone in the audience was holding something in their hand, meaning that they could drink and therefore didn't need to wear a mask. It's like quite a canny way to get around these things.
No, that's also what I've done on flights, where you can take your mask off as long as you're eating or drinking. So you order a packet of crisps and a can of Coke, and you just take the entire plane journey to actually eat each crisp very slowly at a time, and you don't have to wear it. I'm going to come on to fuel in a minute, so I don't specifically want to talk about that now, but I guess it's one element of, do you think there's quite a lot of strife abroad in the land at the moment? Some people are saying, are we back in the 1970s? We've already touched on, tax very high, economy not doing well. I mean, obviously we've had the lockdowns, debt going through the roof. There are certain echoes of the 1970s here, aren't there?
There might be, but ultimately, I mean, I think that comparing this coming winter to a winter of discontent is really overstepping it. I think we're basically going to be in a lot happier place than we were last winter, certainly. We're not going to be in lockdown. The government, although it doesn't seem to be doing anything to encourage growth, and that's a big problem potentially going forward, seems to be able to boast that it's the fastest growing G7 economy at the moment. Similarly, looking at the sense of the opinion polls, there was one poll that came out over the Labour Party conference that still has the Tories ahead. I was talking to Professor Sir John Curtis on my show, was it this morning or yesterday morning? I forget which. And he was actually...
I saw it on YouTube. I saw you.
Yeah, and he was saying that you normally expect a poll bounce to occur around the time of a party conference. You expect the party that's having its conference, the media attention on it, they will do better. Doesn't seem like that's occurring for the Labour Party. Maybe it'll come in the next few days, sure. Maybe not, but it doesn't seem that that's happening right now. And so I'd suggest that the public aren't that dissatisfied. Despite all the strife, they probably look elsewhere in the world, see the HGV shortages in Poland and Germany, see the fuel crisis in China, see lots of other parts of the world actually going through not great times as well, and comparatively, are we okay?
Okay, well, I've got a few stats to dazzle you with about the comparison between today and the 1970s. In the 1970s, house prices were on average 4 times average salaries.
Yeah.
They are now, do you know the number?
Oh, God, it's going to pain me if I...
10 times average salary. On the upside, life expectancy is 10 years higher. 10 years higher than the 1970s. Generally the world's improving. In the 1970s, 25% of homes in England and Wales lacked full indoor planning. 25% lacked full indoor planning. That's now nearest damn it 0%. Although, actually I need to get a plumber around pretty soon. I'm the 0.00%. On the downside, a pint of beer is how much more expensive now than in the 1970s, nominal terms?
Depends where in the country. You forget, I went to university in Durham where you could buy a pint of beer for £1.
Right.
It was very, very weak, but you could still do it.
It was actually a thimble of beer just topped up with water. Right, yeah, okay,
basically. But I mean, in London, what is it? I bought one the other day and it was £7. £7. Outrageous. I'm guessing they're going to be, what, twice as expensive?
28 times as expensive as in the 1970s.
How?
28 times as expensive. A pint of beer. 28 times as expensive. That is...
Blimey.
That's inflation. That is, well, actually probably sort of tax. But you think, obviously those are, don't really paint the whole picture. You think there isn't a great deal to worry about. Not everything's going fine in the world, but you think we're going to basically bounce back? I'm
an optimist, generally. I know that you're less inclined towards an optimistic view of the world, but generally things have got better in the last, especially the last 40 years. We've been on a pretty steady course of improvement. And although there's been a massive bump along the way over this last year and a half, I think that there are the fundamentals there to make life better. I'm hopeful that housing will actually get at least some sort of a bit of a fix. Michael Gove is a minister who gets things done, whatever else he does. And if we can get through something like street votes, that idea of getting buy-in for people.
Just in a particular street, you could change the planning laws if
exactly.
just, a few dozen residents are up for it. That's the concept.
Exactly.
Yep.
If an individual street wants to, build up or expand, that would be down to them, and no one 2 streets over would be able to say no, which could be something that actually gets buy-in. I think it has buy-in from the CPRE, who are normally the most anti-planning people in the world, as well as lots of pro-planning. I think London YIMBY is one of these groups that's really advocating it as well. Potentially that could be a reform that actually really helps the housing market. And then also every single Tory MP that I speak to, and government minister even that I speak to, talks about the tax burden as it stands, as if this is a temporary thing, saying we are getting through this crisis and we want to bring it back down as soon as we feasibly can. Now, I hope that the country will keep them to their promises.
Well, so do I. Listen, look, thank you. You were really making me very pessimistic in the first 5 minutes. You cheered me up a bit. Maybe things aren't as bleak as I think they are, but I know that our next guest, he is Mr. Miserable, this guy, right? You think I'm a pessimist, you wait till you hear from this guy. The world is going to hell in the handcart. So I'm delighted to be joined by, from the IEA home team, Christopher Snowden, the IEA's head of lifestyle economics. So, Chris, Tom's doing a pretty sterling job of trying to cheer me up there. You're going to pop that bubble, aren't you?
Yeah, of course I am.
Things are, even worse than the 1970s?
Well, the last few weeks have really brought things home, haven't they? I mean, I've said to you on this show for a year or so that this whole decade is a write-off, really. Well, you can laugh. You won't be laughing for long. We've got, I think a year ago I was talking about inflation. Now everybody accepts there's going to be serious inflation. I think Bank of England even is saying 4% by the end of the year. A few months ago they were saying, it's going to be 2% or less. It's going up. I think it'll be 5 or 6% by the end of the year.
OK, but this isn't as bad as the 70s, Chris. What do we get,
No, but that's a pretty low bar, isn't it? I would like to see, considering that the previous decade wasn't particularly great, very, very low increases in people's incomes generally. It's pretty flat, lost decade, many people called it. I think this would be worse for various different reasons. It didn't have to be. I think there are various things that are baked in, like inflation, and I suspect that will spiral along with unemployment. I think stagflation is a real prospect now. But then you add in things like net zero and this endless, Boris Johnson's approach to government doesn't seem a lot different to Theresa May's, insofar as she just sees one high-profile problem and tries to stamp it out, or just dishes out money or prints money. So no, I don't see any prospect of hope at all.
Well, there you go, cheery as ever.
But it's nice to be on the show.
It's wonderful to have you back. Otherwise, I end up being the most pessimistic person, right? So I always need to have you here. Let's talk about the fuel issue. I'm going to come to Tom in a minute, although he did say 3 minutes before the show started, he said, the fuel story is so boring, there's nothing else to be said about the fuel story. So we've got to have some levity here, lighten up, crack a few jokes, keep Tom interested. But Chris, what the hell's going on here? Because this points to my is strife returning. I think if you'd said a few years ago the petrol stations are going to run out of petrol, people would assume we're in the middle of a war. Something's unravelling. Estimated 50 to 85% of non-motorway petrol stations have no fuel left. That's one hell of a band, by the way, 50 to 85%. 30% of taxi drivers are unable to work. I think that might just be true anyway. I'm not sure that's anything to do with the fuel crisis. And this is about, I know you've written an article for The Critic magazine on this, which we'll link in the show notes below. In broad terms, the response seems to be that we should do the opposite of the price mechanism. That as demand goes through the roof for something that's in short supply, we should either freeze prices or cut prices as the rational thing. Basically the opposite of economics. So why the hell hasn't the price mechanism been able to do the heavy lifting here?
That's a very good question. I mean, you would think, with the invisible hand being what it is, that if owner of any business sees masses of people queuing up outside, they think, we can afford to put the price up here. And yet the price has increased barely a penny, actually. It's gone up by 0.7 of a penny by Monday, at least. So why hadn't they done that? And if they had done it, what would have happened? I think if they'd have put the price up on Saturday, given that this is basically just a popular delusion and the madness of crowds, I think most people would have gone, actually, I've got half a tank in the car. That's all I need for the next few days. I'll wait for the price to come down and then I'll fill up. I think that would have nipped it in the bud. The interesting question, which is what you asked, is why they didn't do that? And I think the answer is given by the Daily Express front page yesterday, which was based on a handful of petrol stations increasing the price a bit, which was along the lines, I think this is a direct quote, how dare they profit from misery, or something like that, which is what you get when companies are accused of so-called price gouging. It's what you get, particularly in America, where they have anti-price gouging laws. You have a pandemic. 18 months ago, more people want toilet roll, more people want bottled water, whatever people want. Face masks, sanitizers, a good example. The price, of course, of face masks goes up. There's no demand for them before, but you dare charge more for it, and people go, well, you're exploiting the poor in particular. The reality is, and it's a kind of microcosm of communism in a way, is yes, you can try and have a fair price for a product. You can get the government to try and control it, as they do in parts of America, but all that happens is that ultimately nobody or very few people actually have access to it. You have shortages and you have queues. So one great symbol of the Soviet Union is
the price of bread in the Soviet Union was very fair.
Very fair.
Just there was no goddamn bread on the shelf.
It was distributed on the basis of how long you're prepared to wait for it rather than how much you're prepared to pay.
Which is a cost of sorts. So I want to put to Tom, because you alluded to this, but I'm going to put some words in Chris's mouth. This is your fault, basically, isn't it? That you and your colleagues in the media just sort of whipped up this sort of non-event of a storm about there is a fuel crisis, there is a fuel crisis. The government, just by comparison to the 1970s, seemed to be going around saying crisis, what crisis, just as Jim Callaghan did. Why has everybody gone so nuts about this? I mean, full disclosure, I don't even own a car, but I've noticed it's been harder to get an Uber over the last few days.
I think, to be fair to the media, which is something that I don't often say...
well, you kind of do, don't you? I mean, you're part of it.
I am, but I like to think I'm more renegade than most.
Sleeper agent.
Exactly. I don't think that a lot of the media consider a lot of my colleagues as part of the inner sanctum, but it's... to be fair, all of the reporting has been saying there is no actual shortage of fuel. What is happening is people are panic buying. And then when you use the word panic, and you see the word panic written in most newspapers and broadcast on TV...
Then all of your viewers say, I want a slice of that action. I want to go out and panic buy.
Exactly.
That's how I want to spend my Saturday.
To be fair, before any of the petrol panic buying, Kwasi Kwarteng, the business secretary, stood up in the House of Commons saying there won't be blackouts, don't panic. And so all of the headlines became, don't panic, at which people think, why shouldn't we be panicking? It's like if your pilot, before you sort of take off on an aeroplane, says there's absolutely no reason to worry, I've checked the left wing and everything's fine, people suddenly, well, why did you check, what's going on? It's
or kicks the tyres who are ready to take off, But what has gone wrong here? Is this all, I mean, I've seen a range of different statistics. Is this all about the HGV drivers, Tom? Is it a shortage there, which might be, a very small aspect of that might be Brexit, because it seems to be happening in the rest of the Western world as well. And as far as I'm aware, Germany has not left the European Union, and the United States was never in it, and there are similar problems there. So is that the HGV driver shortage was really because of the lockdown? We weren't able to process people into that market. I don't know, all the forms and the tests you need to go through.
I think the pandemic, meant a lot of people who were seasonal workers or whatever went home and haven't come back yet. Potentially a lot of the media noise around Brexit has dissuaded people from thinking that the UK is a nice place to come, and I think that that's less to do with the fact of leaving a trade bloc and more to do with the sort of social mores of how that's reported. But also there was a bit of a shortage before the pandemic. I mean, we hear this 100,000 number about drivers. I mean, most of that 100,000 number was missing many, many years ago, and I think it's only sort of 30,000 or so.
We were always 60,000 below.
Exactly. So, as with everything, it's so many different factors that will all compile. But
what's the solution, though? I mean,
but the fuel thing is almost different from the HGV thing, because it's how people are responding to a perceived crisis of, what was it, 1 or 2 petrol stations in the country that temporarily didn't have much petrol, and that just set everything alight.
So, Chris, the good thing is that we've got a backstop here. Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, says the Army are ready. He has 150 drivers on standby. Now, I knew there'd been some military cuts, but I thought we had an army that amounted to more than 150 soldiers. That doesn't really seem to me that's going to solve the problem. Well, maybe they're not going to be needed at all, right?
It's the best way to calm down a panic is to say we're bringing the army in. That will set people's minds. But the whole thing should blow over. People only use so much petrol. People aren't using any more petrol than they normally do. If they'd have whacked the prices up on Saturday, it would have turned all the people who would just like getting in a queue, and they could have gone off and got their petrol on Tuesday or Wednesday. Now, people who have waited for several days genuinely do need to get petrol. And yet, there's still queues. It must go down, surely, right, in the rest of the week. Unless people are just joyriding everywhere. There has to be a limit. Maybe it's jerry cans being safe.
You're in such long queues with your engine running that this is burning off gallons of petrol, right?
The whole thing is really crazy. And I kind of disagree with Tom a little bit about the Brexit angle to this. I think there is a Brexit angle to this. It is clearly more difficult to come to Britain and be a HGV driver. We have genuinely had fruit and vegetables rotting in the fields, over the course of the summer. And I think we have to be honest about this. You can vote for Brexit without necessarily agreeing with the government's immigration strategy, right? We don't have to have any particular immigration strategy, but the one we've got, and it absolutely has been compounded by COVID-19, there's no two ways about it, and I think it's very difficult to disentangle the two. Clearly, if people literally aren't even allowed to come to the country, they can't work here. But I think we need to be wary about, in the long term, we could see more of this because of the government's immigration strategy.
Okay, and on the immigration strategy, Tom, let me come back to you, because they're now making some provision for, we'll have more relaxed immigration rules for drivers and, I can't remember who else it was, I don't think it was fruit pickers, but a particular sector. This makes me nervous that the government's then, doesn't have a general framework for immigration. It suddenly decides, we haven't got enough strawberry pickers. If you're a strawberry picker, you can come in, but not if you're a plumber or something. I mean, doesn't that actually show that insofar as they have a strategy, it's not really working, because exceptions have to be made when you get a dry up in London?
Well, exactly, and they'll always be fighting the last war. It's, last year we didn't have enough of this, so we're going to issue all of these, and then by the next year it'll be something different. Yeah, absolutely. Although I think remembering back to 2015 and everything, the UKIP strategy was always, the UKIP manifesto always said, less migration, more seasonal work visas. Now, I don't know if there's a way to do that that's sort of uniform across all seasonal work sectors, and you make a distinction between people who are coming here to work for a particular season versus those who come to live here. But it seems that the government's immigration strategy, to some extent, isn't as pernicious as the last government, i.e. Theresa May's one. It's really opening up a lot of high-skilled immigration while constraining low-skilled immigration, which is something that does seem to carry broad public support. In almost every poll that's done, it's not the fact of numbers that people are concerned about, it's sort of who's coming. No one has any concern about IT technicians and doctors and nurses and the sort of socially useful professions that are seen. Open Europe, I think, did a big research piece into this a couple of years ago, and it wasn't so much the value, because people do actually care if bankers come in. I think they want to limit that, but they don't mind if nurses come in, and so it's the social value that people perceive to the roles.
But it's the low-skilled workers that we generally need.
This is the point. We've probably got enough. We've got enough brain surgeons, right? I mean, we don't need another million brain surgeons.
We could do with more doctors. The point is that the government doesn't know how many workers the economy needs. That's the idea. We've got a shortage of this. We'll suddenly cut corners on what you need to do to become an HGV driver. Well, what could go wrong with that?
Let's be real. Let's be real. This is not going to be an issue in about 5 years' time, because everyone will be using Elon Musk's fancy new self-driving Tesla lorries, and so it will be fine.
Well, there'll be other industries that need workers. to not be facetious about this, and. The idea that the government can work out how many people we need. I think people who voted for Brexit on the basis of immigration, I think they wanted basically, in broad terms, they thought the UK government should have the right to turn away Romanian pickpockets. Right? They're the kind of people that didn't want coming in. I don't think that they really wanted to see lorry drivers turned away. Maybe they did. Maybe some people thought, we've got lots of people unemployed and they can become lorry drivers. Kwasi Kwarteng, I think, this week said that the people on furlough should become lorry drivers. I mean, this doesn't show any
understanding of how the world works, right? You need to
The other
quite
point
a long
here,
time.
though, is that there are, I think, over 50,000 lorry driver HGV applications that are waiting to be processed by the government. Now, I mean, colour me shocked, the government's not particularly fast at processing applications and bureaucracy exists, but to some extent you can pin the blame on that clogging up of form filling and everything, as opposed to, do we actually need more people coming in to drive the lorries? If there are 50,000 people there,
Let's shake on blaming the government.
Marvellous.
But what I want to get to here, because I'm getting a bit worried that the price mechanism isn't being allowed to operate again. I mean, why aren't salaries for HGV drivers just going up?
They are.
They are.
£50,000 now.
Yeah.
And what was it? How much of an increase isn't that?
Oh, it's a huge increase, I think.
So presumably, I don't know, folk who have just retired from being a driver are now incentivised to get back to work. And if not enough of them are, we just keep dialing that up, right? There might be that 50 grand isn't enough, 60 or 70 grand would be.
But the bottleneck for a lot of these people, and clearly a lot of these new applications, is processing those applications. And of course, no one's been able to get a driving test in any good time for the last year and a half, because we had many lockdowns when you couldn't get into a car with a stranger and drive about for however many sessions it takes to get your license. And so you've got to work through all of that. And I don't know whether it's the same driving instructors. It probably isn't the same driving instructors, but it's probably the same broad processing facilities that are dealing with an enormous backlog in people getting their ordinary driver's licenses, that also now need to deal with a massive increase in HGV driver licenses. It's all just sort of funneled into one small bottleneck, and that's going to take some time to fix.
OK, but Tom, I know you have to leave us now, but you've cheered me up a bit. Immediate fuel prices over in days.
One final thing to cheer you up, because Brexit isn't all bad news. We heard this week that gene editing is back on the table, and this is the real prize of Brexit. This kind of regulatory divergence, swapping away from the really restrictive regulatory structures of the European Union, becoming, as Britain could well be, a bioscience superpower with all of these. If we become sort of the not the workshop of the world, but maybe the laboratory of the world when it comes to these kind of new technologies.
So we could have gene-edited strawberries rotting in our fields. We can't find anybody to pick them rather than normal strawberries.
Hey, maybe we can gene edit them so that they don't rot for many more.
Oh, there you go. That is an optimistic. Unrottable strawberries. I mean, Nirvana is really here. Tom, it's been great to have you. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm going to be welcoming a couple of new guests in just a second, but before that, quick commercial break to help my colleague Chris Snowden here. Along with Live with Littlewood on the IEA London YouTube channel, Chris presents his own programme, The Swift Half, with Snowden. The next one will be going out at 5 p.m. on Thursday, the 7th of October. It's already in the can. Chris interviews historian and Telegraph columnist and also a regular guest here at the IEA, Tim Stanley, who's releasing his new book, Whatever Happened to Tradition. We got a short clip of that coming up just now.
So this is really the classic case for conservatism, really, the Burke argument that you don't keep everything exactly the same, but you're very cautious about change and you respect traditional institutions.
And it would be untraditional to resist change. That's one of the geniuses of most traditions, is that actually they fluctuate over time, they change, they interact with each other. And what you end up with looks very different to what you began with. But good traditions have core foundational principles, which means that if you take the history of that tradition, you go back and forth, you can see the changes, but you can also see that the thing remains substantially the same. So a classic example is the monarchy. Queen Elizabeth II is no Henry VIII. Thank goodness. We don't have a divine right of king kind of monarch anymore. We have a constitutional one, but she's still a monarch. She's still a tradition, a living tradition. So yes, it is actually built into the DNA of traditions to change. And by doing that, you can progress while, as I say, retaining some sense of yourself and a sense of stability. This is what conservatism is about. This is what old-fashioned pre-20th century conservatism was all about, but it's been a bit forgotten because conservatism got sidetracked onto other issues during the 20th century. But I think we're coming back to these big issues of how do you actually handle technological, economic and social change.
So, Chris, tell us a bit about the Swift Half. This is, I think you sit down for, the clues in the name, for a Swift half hour and probably a Swift half.
Exactly.
A pint of beer as well. It's the half refers to the time, not the amount of alcohol, right?
Exactly.
And you interview somebody that you think the wider world needs to know more about.
Yeah, generally there's people I like. It's fairly chummy. But I think maybe people are getting sick of the 3-hour Joe Rogan type podcasts and they just want to have a bite-sized 30-minute chat between people who quite like themselves.
And just give us a little teaser then, you and Tim Stanley, what has happened to tradition?
Well, he's very much in favour of it. He was trying to convince me that conservatism is the way forward. But I still don't really understand what conservatism is in terms of real principles and what books can you read about conservatism? Very little. Burke, I suppose, which I've never read. Yeah, but that's about it. Ain't much more. Yeah, Peter Hitchens.
Bit of Peter Hitchens, bit of Tim Stanley. Yeah. Great.
Well, I'm going to read the book and see if I'm convinced.
Cool. Okay. Well, so log into that. And it goes out on 5 p.m. on Thursday. That goes live. So again, remember to hit the like button and subscribe and the notification bell on the notes below, and you can catch up with Chris next week. Now joining us, two more great guests joining us to pick through the Labour Party conference and obesity strategy, and probably a few other things as well. Please give a very warm welcome to my colleague Emma Revell, the IA's Head of Public Affairs, and Christian Calgie, Senior Reporter at Guido Fawkes. Christian, good to see you, mate. Good to see you, good to see you, Emma. So, it's been the Labour Party conference this week, and we are asking, can the Labour Party bear up to any scrutiny? Who writes these scripts? What did we make of it? I did watch nearly all of Keir Starmer's speech. I assumed it was going to be Christian an hour long, not a full 95 minutes. So I did miss the rest of it. What is Starmerism? Are you any the wiser about what it stands for?
I don't think anyone really knows what Starmerism stands for, mainly because yesterday afternoon Starmer did an interview where he basically said he will say and do anything to get power, which I actually think is an admirable principle for a leader of the Labour Party. I mean, it's basically
the strategy
the Tory Party have been doing for the last 100 years, and it's been pretty successful bar a couple of periods, and Blair basically did the same thing. So I don't think it's a bad thing at this point not really to know what Starmerism is. And actually, he released this 14,000 word essay earlier last week, and there was so much stuff in it about efficient government spending and low tax for workers and not increasing national insurance that a fellow think tank, the Taxpayers Alliance, actually invited him to become a member. Yep. So as Labour leaders go over the last sort of decade and a bit, I'm sort of relaxed, broadly. And we also know there's soft patriotism, there's a commitment to the army, there's a commitment to NATO. So the foreign policy stuff, he's not, sympathetic to Russia. So on those sort of big issues, even if he comes in and he does the usual socialist meddling with employment and inflation and government spending and all that stuff.
Like the Tories.
Well, exactly. So that stuff can be fixed by some sort of more sensible government in the future. But on the basics, at least we can all breathe a sigh of relief that fundamentally, Britain will not implode during a period of Starmer government.
Emma, what did you make of it? Did you watch his speech and listen to it?
No, I didn't. I actually had better things to do with that 90-minute segment of my day. But I think Christian's exactly right. The one thing that Keir Starmer has in his favour is that he is not Jeremy Corbyn. And actually, when you set the bar that low for what the Labour Party looks like, the only way really is up.
So, Emma, our colleague here, Christian Nemitz, I think made a very insightful analysis of both Starmer's speech and Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves. It wasn't so much a question of looking what was in the speech, it was actually all the stuff that wasn't in it. I don't think the word socialism was used, nationalisation was not used, attacks on global elites was not used. So it may have been boring, but boring from a free market perspective might be a lot better than if it had been peppered with more radical language, perhaps.
Exactly, yeah. It was sort of... Neutral's not the word, because obviously it's not the kind of policies we would endorse, but it could be worse. That's what Jeremy Corbyn has showed us, is it could always be worse. And the one thing I do particularly have an issue with is nationalisation isn't in there, but public ownership is. And I'm not 100% sure what the difference is, to be honest. I'm not sure Keir Starmer knows either.
And, he said, Starmer did say, we need a strong economy for public services. Do you think, Christian, that they're sort of getting it back to where Tony Blair was, that you can have arguments about how much you should spend on public services and which public services, but there's a recognition again that the money has to come from a growing private sector? You can then argue about, exactly how much you scrape off the private sector to put into the NHS or welfare benefits or education. But, again, it was an IEA colleague of mine who actually gave Keir Starmer's Fabian Society essay of 14,000 words, which I have read. It was even more boring than his speech of 7,300 words. Again, 2 out of 3, because he said, basically there's 3 points in this. 1, locate the golden egg that's created by capitalism. 2, find the goose that's laid the golden egg, and that's a growing, enterprising private sector. So far, so good, two ticks. Problem was point 3. Kill the goose. Right? So 2 out of 3 probably is bad. But do you think they actually, in seriousness, and Rachel Reeves as well, do you think they're back to actually saying the market economy has to, the private side of the economy, the free side of the economy, has to provide all the resources and revenue for public services?
I think there's an increased understanding. The question is, and we've seen it really this week in extra laser focus, is Keir Starmer is clearly going to have a huge amount of battles between him, the public, his shadow cabinet and the Labour membership. The question is, how strong is he going to be on some issues? Where is he going to give ground just for the sake of peace on other issues? And where is the Labour Party actually going to be on policy terms when it comes to writing the manifesto? Because I can envisage a thing where essentially it's Blairism but wrapped up in a sort of a Milibandite sort of wrapping paper, or it is sort of Milibandism with an equally nazy and uncharismatic leader. So that is the question. We don't quite know yet. What we have learnt this week is Starmer has, I think, a bit of a political gnash. He knows when to fight the battles. He knows what battles need fighting, and he's willing to actually, tell the left of the party, you are going to consign us to opposition for a generation. The last manifesto almost, what was the phrase he used today, obliterated the Labour Party, and it was only through this sort of army of 500,000 ground volunteers that we have any semblance of a party left at all. And I think that's the interesting thing.
Chris, you, I, and most guests on Live with Littlewood, and most of us at the IEA are pretty sceptical about government spending and whether whether it really amounts to getting things done. Even if there are useful things that the government does, it often does it with a large amount of waste or a colossal amount of overhead. But what about this? This was one of Starmer's propositions, and to my mind, just a straight waste of money. He wants to set up an office for value for money.
Oh, really?
Have you heard it? Yeah. I mean that's pretty extraordinary. I think. It kind of speaks to the problem, doesn't it? You've got the government spending hundreds of billions every year, but we're going to actually set up a new quango with 6 people in it called the Office for Value for Money. Everybody else doesn't need to worry about it. Just this handful of people. But what do you make of his broad approach? Are you able to detect what Keir Starmer's vision is?
Well, no, and I think one thing should be remembered about Starmer is he's not some Tony Blair figure who is trying to bring the party to the centre ground. This is a guy who was in the Corbyn cabinet. He stayed in the Corbyn cabinet, standing shoulder to shoulder with... Sorry.
They didn't quite make... I know a lot of people think Jeremy Corbyn won the 2017 general election,
but he didn't. In his shadow cabinet, it stuck by him when dozens and dozens of other MPs resigned for all sorts of different reasons. He is not in any way a right-winger, obviously. I don't think he's even a centrist. He's a socialist. He's probably to the left of Ed Miliband, who only a few years ago was Red Ed. So, let's be clear about that. But I think his main problem is that even if he's able to get rid of the really far loony lefties, which I think he genuinely is trying to do, he still has the problem with what I would call lazily the woke left, for want of a better word. I haven't been watching much of the Labour conference. I've watched none of it. I'm like Emma, I've got better things to do. But I have seen clips on Twitter of these absolute fruitcakes in dungarees making these mad speeches. And this is the Labour membership. And most of what I've seen in the media about the Labour conference has been about the question of whether men have cervixes or not. And Starmer
one of the great questions of our time.
Well, it kind of is a totemic question, because for 95% of the population in this country, it shows whether you're mad or not. And they're on the wrong side of it. And so they can root out the kind of economic far left, the Trotskyites and the communists, but unless they manage to put some clear blue water between themselves and the nutters who are coming out of universities, I don't see how he could ever win back the Red Wall or anybody else.
Christian, Rachel Reeves seemed to actually, in her speech, come up with a tax cut. They're going to phase out business rates. Now, once you start reading the fine print, I gather that they're going to phase out business rates, but they're going to bring in a tax on commercial property. Not quite sure what the difference is. They're like nationalisation and public ownership. I'm not quite sure what the difference is, but this is actually a tax cut of sorts pledged, or do you think it's just? Well, I was going to say, is it robbing Peter to pay Paul? It's actually just robbing Peter to pay Peter if you just change it to a commercial property tax.
Theoretically, I mean that would I think save the taxpayer or cost HMRC, whichever way you like to look at it. I think I can guess which way in this room. That would save the taxpayer about 25 billion quid a year. Now, obviously, unless they are proposing a serious cut to services that either the government or local councils provide, that has to be made up from somewhere. And the figures that I sort of put together this week showed that there's currently about a 155 billion quid discrepancy between what Labour, even on the sort of the limited amount of policies we've had since Starmer came to power in Labour, there's about 155 billion quid discrepancy there.
You mean that would be in addition to the present budget deficit?
Well, no. I mean, literally, in terms of if Labour were in power today and implemented the policies they've announced, including that tax cut, including opposing the national insurance rise, including cutting X or Y, they're already 155 billion quid in debt because they've not even balanced the books on 2 years' worth of policy manifestos, because I think Emily Thornberry also said they were going to increase the new tech tax that the government's trying to negotiate cross borders, and they're going to increase it from 2% to 12%.
Digital services.
Yes, the digital services tax. That only brings in 2.4 billion or something, even on their measures, and that excludes companies going overseas and all the other nonsense. So, that particular pledge might have been eye-catching for some of the people in our circles, but is ultimately nonsense.
Emma, what's your take on all of this? Do you think, I mean, the IEA and various other think tanks have been banging on about debt and deficit, and we can't afford it, and it's economically quite dangerous. We also make the moral point where, essentially deficits are just taxes deferred onto the next generation, the one after that. But we don't seem to be making much headway here, right? Have we actually got into a position where the credit card debt effectively for the UK is so great that you can't even get your head around it, so you might as well just keep whacking more stuff on it, and we're just not going to be able to persuade people that we need to make some sort of effort to balance the books at some point before too long?
Yeah, I think this is one of the problems of the enormous COVID spending and COVID borrowing that we've seen over the last 18 months, which is that this level of spending has become so normalised that the general public don't bat an eyelid anymore. They just think, oh, well, if there's money for that, there's money for this. Now, we know that's counterproductive, because if there's money for that, there's now less money for the other thing. But the general public seem to think, well, if you can borrow, if it's worth borrowing for, say, the NHS, it's obviously worth borrowing for education. It is incredibly worrying, because, as you say, the general public really don't seem to be grasping the argument that we're trying to make.
Yeah, I've heard this. Well, if we could afford HS2, we could also afford to spend 100 billion extra on the NHS. No. You pick one.
Exactly
right?
opposite problem.
Scrap HS2 and spend 100 billion more on the
couldn't afford HS2 either.
Well,
And to be fair to Rishi, he does seem to have some understanding that what goes in must kind of get close to what goes out. Unlike Joe Biden, unlike, I think, Keir Starmer, certainly unlike Jeremy Corbyn, there is some effort, at least on his part, if not Boris Johnson's, to try and at least attempt to balance the books. But it's a very poor show. But the stagflation will soon bring people to their senses, Mark. Don't worry about that.
Anyway, I can see you've taken it. You've definitely taken a
It's
great
very furry. I like it. Yeah,
the Labour
it's quite
teddy bear.
soft.
Very soft. Very soft. Well, listen, I want to move on then from from the Labour Party to another a bunch of Chris Snowden's close friends, the Obesity Health Alliance. This is a group that has in it all sorts of Snowden's mates, Action on Sugar, Cancer Research UK, all the sort of people you hang out with, Chris.
All the favourites.
So yesterday they've laid out their 10-year plan, and some of it's pretty familiar to us, on how we're going to tackle the obesity epidemic or pandemic or whatever they're calling it. Here are a few of the highlights. They want to reframe obesity as an issue that is collective rather than individual and personal. I mean, this suits me fine because over lockdown I've put on more than a stone. And I reckon it's your guys' fault, right? So I'm very happy for it
Society's
to
be.
to blame. Society's to blame, yeah. I don't see why I should take any responsibility for it. And then there's a whole load of other suggestions on, yet more restrictions. And but apparently we need to ensure that, this is a quote, we need to ensure that government communications and campaigns do not perpetuate weight stigma. Now, I can't quite work out what we're trying to do here. Whether we're trying to shout at people like me to lose a few pounds, or whether we're trying to say, no, it's fine. It's somebody else's fault you've lost a few pounds. Explain what these people are up to, Chris.
They're very keen to point out that they are not stigmatising people living with obesity, which is what they call fat people.
Living with
people
obesity.
People who live with obesity, yeah. And that's why they invent terms like living with obesity. But I think it's kind of inevitable that you will create stigma around people if you strongly suggest time and time again that they are going to bankrupt the NHS and are costing society tens of billions of pounds, which is what they do, quite dishonestly, in my opinion. So, yeah, whereas with smoking, you sort of had this campaign of what they openly called denormalisation, which was supposed to be denormalisation of the habit and of the tobacco industry, but of course became the stigmatisation of smokers, who were more or less second-class citizens in this country now. The same thing will happen with obesity, and that's one of the malevolent aspects of the whole campaign, I think. They might not want obese people to be, people living with obesity to be stigmatised, but it's inevitably going to happen. And their raft of measures that they proposed yesterday, which didn't actually get much media attention, which I'm sure they'll be very sad about. I think the Mail and the Express reported a bit. Most media outlets ignored it, which in a way is a shame because they were really barking mad proposals that suggested it was essentially everything the government's already committed to, which in itself is much more than any other government in the world.
Which is a load of advertising bans.
Advertising bans, telling supermarkets where they can position their goods. You can't put the cheese on the end of the aisle or in the entrance or the exit. Lots of things. We can ban energy drinks to kids. They've just taken all that and, rather unsurprisingly, if you're familiar with these groups and the concept of the slippery slope, extended it. So they say, well, the government is going to ban Red Bull from being sold to people under the age of 16. Let's extend that to other unhealthy foods and drinks. So if you're a child, you won't be able to buy sweets. We're going to ban TV advertising for so-called junk food before 9 p.m. Let's then extend that to cinema, to radio, to billboards. It's all totally predictable. And in a way, the government is going to have a bit of a job explaining why it's not going to do all this stuff.
Because it's just the logical extension of the government's present policy.
The point.
Yeah. Emma, what's your take on this? I've got a theory that there is, we were discussing earlier on the show, price mechanisms with regard to fuel and price mechanisms with regard to the salaries that we pay to HGV drivers, that the price mechanism can solve it. I've got a theory that the price mechanism can solve this, and here is my personal theory. Over the course of lockdown, as a consequence, a feature of the weight I've put on, I now do not fit into any of my old suits. This has cost me a bloody fortune. Right? Probably like £2,500 of suits, which are basically useless. Went to Mospros the other day, spent the best part of £2,000. Now, I probably could have afforded my waistline to go out an inch. You know, that would have been a tight squeeze, but 2 inches, forget it. There's just no way I can do it. So, where do you think this sort of obsessiveness is coming from? And this oddity that it's a collective problem. I can't. This is a bit I can't get my head around.
Well, that is the thing I think is the most terrifying, is the idea that this is a collective problem, that somehow by being overweight or by living with obesity, you are actually putting a burden on everyone else. And it's basically giving free rein to the rest of the general public to say, why don't you nag some fat people? Basically, you know, it's no longer an entirely individual decision. The burden doesn't just fall on that person. It actually affects you, regardless of whether you're, very slim, underweight, overweight, whatever. It's giving them free rein.
But it's not just that they're saying. I mean, they are saying that. But when they talk about what they call the obesogenic environment, they're suggesting that it's essentially the entire system. It's almost a Marxist way of looking at it, in which you see individuals as pawns and the system as something that has to be changed, because if you change the system, you will change the individual. And so in their interpretation of this, they think that there is a latent demand for healthy food and exercise amongst the general public, but people are simply not allowed to do it because you've got horrible capitalist corporations desperate to sell you high-fat food, and governments that don't give people enough space to run around in. And so you have to change the whole of society in order to
Yeah, because they were talking about a system that has normalised high sugar, high fat foods. It's like, well, yes.
Yeah. Not because people like them.
Because they're tasty. That's why it's normal. It's not a conspiracy.
Normal people like tasty food.
They taste good.
Yeah. Christian, what's your take on this? These public health campaigns don't seem to get, don't carry enormous favour with the British public. I'm guessing, like most readers of the Guido Fawkes website, think this is all a whole load of nonsense. And of course, the Guido Fawkes website readership are a perfect, microcosm of the wider population.
If I could build my perfect society,
readers of Guido Fawkes.
SW1 and that comment section.
But they do seem incredibly successful of actually making it public policy, right? That it becomes law.
Yes, that is the irritating thing, and I think the unfortunate reality with Boris is that, in a moment of policy, contemplation, you return to sort of first basics of principles, don't you? Think, what do I really believe? The problem is Boris doesn't really believe anything. So whereas even David Cameron might have gone back and thought, okay, my instinct is to not intervene, and so that will be, I want to be dissuaded from that if you're going to persuade me. Boris is sort of, what's popular?
Well, he might have believed he was going to die of COVID as well. I think that was the big thing, wasn't it? And then people told him, it's because you're fat.
He's gone out jogging, he's got a personal trainer, he's losing weight, he's on a new diet regime.
He doesn't look any slimmer to me.
I think he looks slimmer.
You're a harsh,
You're very harsh. And he's managed to do that without actually implementing any of these policy proposals.
This is what annoys me so much.
The obesity.
So he's proving it is actually an individual issue.
Yes,
not a collective.
he's not.
As Tom Watson.
And yet he's not going to. He's not going to listen to that. Admittedly, Tom Watson, I don't think this raft of proposals includes sort of putting chunks of butter in your morning coffee, does it? I don't.
No. Was that Tom Watson's
But it does involve banning Tony the Tiger.
Well, that is a very successful campaign, removing cartoon characters from cereal boxes. But at the same time, you've got all these policies. So many of them are aimed at children, as if they're sort of autonomous individuals, right? They've got a watershed, so 5-year-olds can't see McDonald's adverts. How are they getting McDonald's? It's still the adults watching it and thinking that's a lifestyle choice. So either, these people need to come out and say what they really think.
There's not many 5-year-olds who can drive their own HGV to McDonald's as far as I'm aware.
Well, 5-year-olds can't drive to McDonald's at the moment, primarily because of the fuel shortage rather than the height. But that is the main thing. These people need to come out and say, look, we are effectively wanting this sort of sugar Sharia law, ban it all, get rid of every gram of happiness from our lives. If you want a bag of sweets, you need to meet a guy on a street corner in a Mac, with some street lighting, and it needs to be done like that. Or let people make up their own minds and follow Boris's inspiration, which is the ability to lose weight, something I very much hope to do soon, without having to, destroy the online advertising industry in the process and all sorts of jobs in food production, which we need at the moment.
Emma, one of the things that troubles me about this, although I'm, essentially a libertarian, so I think people should be able to, the definition of a liberal is somebody who believes that people should be able to go to hell in their own merry way. So I don't think that the government should take these interventions. But it's worse than that from my perspective, because if you believe Chris's great works, and of course I agree with virtually every word he writes, these things are actually not even very effective, right? So, and then we never seem to go and audit them, right? So if you did, let's do a trial. Let's scrap McDonald's advertising for 6 months and see if fewer 5-year-olds are eating McDonald's hamburgers and really audit it. And if you were to discover actually it has no impact at all on kids' hamburger consumption, then you reverse that prohibition. But that sort of audit or repeal never seems to occur.
The audit, I mean, Chris is the only person I know who audits these things. And it's not just we don't audit them after they've been in effect for, say, 6 months, a year, 2 years to see what's happened. It's the assessment beforehand of what the government believes will happen tells them that it won't be effective. It says, oh, if we ban advertising online and all this kind of stuff, it will reduce calorie consumption by sort of, is it like 5 calories a week? It's
Which is about a Smartie
half a Pringle or something completely ridiculous. So it's not just that we don't look back and review how well it's gone. We know from the beginning it's not going to work, and they do it anyway.
That's a good point. I mean, but actually, it's even worse than that. Because that is only a modelling evidence. We do actually have real world evidence. We have randomised control trials for this stuff. If you look what they're actually trying to do, take mandatory labelling on menus, for example, calorie labelling on menus, which I'm not against on libertarian grounds. People should be given information. But we have loads of examples from around the world where they've tried this and it makes absolutely no difference, because actually people know that if they buy a burger it's got a lot of calories in it. If they get a cream cake it's got a lot of calories. They might not know exactly how many, but they know it's got a lot. And so when it comes up and says 258 calories, you go, yeah, fine, that's more or less what I expected. These things make no difference. We've got a food reformulation strategy going on. We have randomised control trials looking at this. It makes no difference. This stuff isn't just unscientific, it's actually anti-scientific. Because if you look at the evidence, then it says, no, this is not going to work. We know, one more example, we know that people who live near fast food shops are no more obese than people who don't live in it, which is not that surprising because they bloody deliver, right? And yet, councils up and down the country are banning new fast food shops from opening near schools.
Yeah. Well, I think it even, anecdote, not data here, but for me it even had a perverse effect. When the calories came in at my local branch of KFC, of which I'm a very regular attendee, and I sort of walked in. You know, in fast food restaurants, right? You can barely walk in the door before somebody says, "What would you like? What would you like?" You know, you're not allowed to peruse the menu for some reason. You know what you want. And I said, "Well, I'm trying to do the calculations, but I haven't quite done them yet. Can you just get me as many calories as you can for 20 quid?" I don't really mind whether it's a bucket or this or the other, but you do the math.
It's like a bucket of calories.
Yeah. So let me just quick thought from each of you. How do we, Christian, then Emma, then Chris, is there any way we can actually operate a fight back against this? Is it to do the retrospective research and point out how farcical it is? Do we have to do more at the early stage to say, you're saying that your policy would only cut calories by half a Smartie a day per kid? This is madness. Why are you destroying? What? You know, because we're losing this battle. Why?
Look, I've not sat down and formulated my own policy, but something I do genuinely believe in is shame as a policy, and I think that this raft of proposals from the Anti-Obesity Alliance is so bizarre, because at the same time they're trying to, you know, intervene and sort of ban these things, ramp up prices or whatever, but they're also trying to make a more friendly environment to those who live with obesity. As far as I'm concerned, leave things the same, ramp up the pressure on people to lose weight, and eventually the shame will get to them and they'll start doing it.
Emma, let's start shaming the nannies rather than fat shaming people.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think shame necessarily is the way to go, because I think most people who you would target for shame already know they're fat. It's not something that people are unaware of generally. You know.
Or even if they don't, they're shameless kind of people anyway.
Exactly,
like my story
they
at
don't
KFC.
care. It's not going to make any difference. I think we do need to keep banging the drum for the fact that this very clearly is not working. There is very good evidence, as Chris says, from multiple countries, multiple experiments across the world. This does not work, and I think we need to keep holding governments to account, saying, why do you keep doing this when you know it doesn't work?
Chris, what do you think? Is it the empirical case this doesn't work, or is it the kind of more principled case, it's my life, I should be able to live it as I choose without you intervening?
Well, it has to be a bit of both. I go on the TV and radio a lot talking about this, and always I get asked the question, well, OK, you think this doesn't work, fair enough. What's the solution? I honestly don't think there is one. I don't think there's a solution. In affluent countries where people are relatively free, I think people
like
will
chicken.
always fill their face. I mean, obesity is a very heavily, for one of them, forgive the pun, very heavily hereditary condition, incredibly strong genetic element to it. Once a country is affluent enough for people to stuff their face and get fat, unfortunately they will. I can't think of anything short of total economic collapse, as you've seen in, Cuba after the USSR fell apart, there was a drop in obesity because nobody had any petrol to walk around, they couldn't afford food, and Venezuela in the last 10 years has seen a reduction in obesity. North Korea is pretty good on obesity. These are the only countries that have succeeded, and I don't think they're really
Here's a plan. Go for carbon net zero within 2 years, and then we'll all be so poor we won't be able to afford this stuff.
Quite possibly,
Mission accomplished.
Killed 2 birds with one stone.
Well, on that happy note from Chris Snowden, just a message for you guys watching on YouTube. Now that we've got a live audience here on Live with Littlewood, we do have the opportunity for you to come and watch live, and you can then throw fruit at us and the rest of it, jeer from the sidelines. We'll be offering seats to our top tier patrons on that, so stay tuned for the next episode in 2 weeks' time. I'll be giving you some more details on that. My huge thanks to our IEA top tier online patrons: Donald Blaney, Eric Keane, James Burns, Mark Edwards, Philip Osoof, Richard Leader, Robert Appleby and Timothy Worrell. They're our top tier donors. Thank you. Please join them if you can. You can go to the, if you look at the show notes below, you can find us on patreon.com/IEA London if you've got a few pennies to spare. So please do that. If you haven't got a few pennies to spare, well, it's still free to click like and subscribe and hit the notification bell. You can do that for free. Thanks very much for watching us. Thanks to those who've been in our audience. Look forward to seeing you again to put the world to rights in 2 weeks' time. And my special thanks to Tom, who's gone, but to Chris, Emma and Christian, thanks very much indeed for joining us.